Welcome to the Press One for Nick podcast. My name is Nick Glimsdahl, and my guest this week is Jillian Benbow. She is the Senior Community Experience Manager at SPI Media and the host of the podcast. I almost said Press One for Nick podcast. That's awkward. The podcast, The Community Experience, which is awesome. Welcome to the podcast, Jillian.
Thank you, Nick. Happy to be here.
Yeah, you are now the new host of the Press One for Nick podcast. I just fired myself.
Just announced it. Yeah, it was press 2 for Jillian.
Press 2 for Jillian, a new podcast. Everyone should join. That's awesome. Well, one question I ask every single guest at the very beginning is, what's one thing people might not know about you?
And I still am not sure which thing to disclose. I have a macabre interest and actually spend a decent amount of time in graveyards and cemeteries, volunteering for something called Find a Grave, which a lot of people use for genealogy research. So if someone puts a request in for where I live, I will go find the grave they are looking for and take a picture of it and upload it to that website. And then they have it for their records for whatever they're researching. And I'm super into it. Like, I subscribe to this like historical newspaper website. I'll look people up and like find them in the paper and all sorts of stuff from usually the 1800s. Where I live, it's a rich mining history. So the 1800s mining booms, there's just a lot of people that unfortunately were buried here. So yeah.
Yeah. That's
still want to interview me?
Yeah. So that's it for the podcast. No. Yeah. That's actually really interesting. So what was the oldest grave site or graveyard or gravestone that you've seen to date?
Oh, well, that would not be in America.
Okay.
Probably so. Anybody in Scotland, in Edinburgh, there's they're called kirkyards, and there's in Edinburgh is the Greyfriars Kirkyard, and it is well known for many reasons, but most recently probably is that was J.K. Rowling's inspiration for Tom Riddle. There is a real Tom Riddle buried there. If only he knew what kind of legacy he has now. He was like a tradesman in the Caribbean.
Wow.
And also the Dark Lord. So I would say probably graves over there. And I'm trying to remember specifically, but I mean, they had areas that were from, before the 1400s, but there's a lot of like 1600s in there. It's beautiful. It's absolutely, I find those places just to be like really pretty and peaceful. It's fun
and quiet for some reason.
Yeah.
Because
oddly quiet.
They're no longer living.
Yeah, it's a really quiet crowd, which is great for me. I'm like, finally, silence.
That is awesome. I love that. It's such an interesting fact. So tell my listeners a little bit about SPI Media. What do you guys do there?
Yeah. Well, so SPI Media is the, official name of what Pat Flynn does. So if anybody's ever heard of Pat Flynn, he also is a podcaster. He has the Smart Passive Income podcast. That's where the SP and I come from, Smart Passive Income. He also does a show called Ask Pat. He's on YouTube. He does it all. And so he, over the last, 15 years, maybe, has built up this business that started as just him, to then him and his assistant Jess, who is lovely, to now we have this entire company, SPI Media. There's 12 of us, huge company. And yeah, we kind of just support the content that Pat does, but we also are growing as far as what we do as SPI Media. So recently we put on a summit for business owners that was about audience growth and monetization called Audience Driven. And Pat was the, one of the main presenters of that, but it was fully put on by SPI Media, and it was more about the larger brand name. So I'm the Senior Community Experience Manager there, which means we have a private paid community for business owners. You apply to get in, the whole 9 yards, and I oversee that. And then we also have another community called the Academy, and that is our course community. So anybody that purchases one of our courses gets access to that for as long as they want it. And it's just a place to meet up with other people doing the courses, kind of be able to mastermind and talk through problems and stuff like that. So we also oversee that.
That's so cool. And I do want to dig in and I think focus mostly on community. But with that in mind, you are also a co-host of the Community Experience. Tell my listeners a little bit about what you guys are doing there.
Yeah, well, as the name suggests, so that I co-host that with my colleague Tony Bacigalupo, and we talk all things community. And I come from a digital community background, so running online communities, membership communities, free communities, the whole 9 yards. And Tony comes from a co-working background, so he has a ton of experience with physical get-togethers, bringing people together, gathering, and all of that. He used to run a co-working space in New York City, and he's just a great wealth of information for kind of more the in-person live event type thing. So between the two of us, we have all sorts of crazy conversations. And we even had Nick on the podcast. We recorded recently.
Yeah. So even before whenever mine comes out, I think it's January-ish, but take some time, listen to the Press One for Nick podcast, and then immediately go to the Community Experience media, wherever podcasts are listened to, and take a peek at that, because it's a really fun and interesting and informative podcast. So speaking of experience, or speaking of community, it shouldn't come as a surprise, but how would you explain community?
That's such a good question that we ask everybody, so I should have a good answer. I think, in the broadest sense of the term, community is a place where people with common interests or passions gather.
Okay.
Is the simplest way could do a whole dissertation, but we'll go with that.
That's where it starts. That's the foundation.
Yeah.
So, somebody who kind of runs a community, you don't necessarily have to talk about your community, but in general, where do people get it wrong? Where do people get this community and their expectations, or they're building up of where they get it wrong?
That is such a great question for our current times, because right now, I'm sure everyone listening can think about or recognizes that it's kind of a buzzword right now, like community, join my community. We're launching a community, whether it's a brand or an independent creator, what have you. And there's all these platforms now, whether it's Patreon or Circle or, Mighty Networks, it's easy to create a community. So a lot of communities are being created. And unfortunately, where I think a lot of people are getting it wrong is they're confusing a community with customers. So it's like a cash grab. Join my community that I've spent zero time really, focusing what the purpose of the community is and why it's a value to the person joining. And instead they're thinking about themselves and how this is going to help them be, a more well-known name or sell more of whatever it is they sell. So I think there's a lot of that happening right now. I think community is just going to continue to grow as businesses see the value. But a lot are going to immediately turn it into something and we have to make a bunch of money off of it. And community is not, you can for sure, but that's not how it works. People see right through that. I see a lot of communities folding in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think community and customer experience have a lot in common, because organizations will have a customer experience department. And instead of actually focusing what's best for the customer, they'll say, where's the ROI on this? How do I actually focus back on the customer and bring in funds to fund this department or this individual person? And it's not necessarily, it is important to have that. And so you can go and pitch that to the leadership and show the retention, and it's going to come in time. But that shouldn't be the immediate result. It shouldn't be the first step. It shouldn't say, what type of money am I going to bring, and how quick is this going to bring me money? Because it seems like the same is true with community, because if you don't understand the end in mind, and the end in mind isn't, I'm going to make $1 bajillion, because that's what happens. And because if your mindset is there, I would think that your conversations would be different. They would be more abrupt. They wouldn't be adding value on the front end.
Yeah, it's very true. There's a ton of overlap, and I've unfortunately been employed by organizations that kind of took that, they start the value of what a community brings or what excellent customer experience brings, they start to take for granted and start cutting things or expecting more, you get through more tickets, more issues, whatever, and they want to be able to track it. They want metrics that prove ROI. And that can be a challenge because sure, I can show you metrics in a community where it's hopping, right? Like there's high engagement, the commenting, et cetera, is high, but that could be fighting, that doesn't mean it's healthy. And that is certainly true for some communities, and it falls into the vanity metrics, right? It's like saying we have 10 million users, but what you're not telling me is your actual engaged users is 5,000. It's just that 10 million people have an account, right? And the same goes for quality. So how do I prove to you that my community is high quality and full of loyal, followers or customers or whatever it is the company thinks it is? And that's not like, there's not really a true metric. There's several things you can look at, but it's never going to tell the story. And the only way to really know is to be in it. And of course, the people who want that information are never in it.
And is it to show about hey, there's this engagement, here is the active versus passive community members? Is it about storytelling when you're trying to promote the new community members, or how do you go about that? Is there dashboards where you can see metrics and KPIs where you can kind of see how much engagement or how much interaction, or what's it look like for the retention of the first 90 days?
Yeah, I mean, any platform that is designed specifically for a community is going to have metrics. I don't think they're all quite there yet with like the depth of metrics. Some are better than others. There are also third-party tools you can use, but for the most part, you can at least get the basics, and that's like the month over month, week over week of engagement, as far as comments, messages, reply, likes, whatever. So you can kind of decide, and depending on what your community purpose is, will determine which ones you're looking at. New signups. Have they signed in the last 30 days is a big one at Circle. So you have some basics in front of you. And I think it's always important to kind of keep an eye on that and track it, at least on a monthly, so that you can, one, benchmark, like, okay, this is normal. And then from that, see what's going on. Because if you're noticing a slow decline over 6 months, that if you're just in the community day to day, you might not notice, you can start to question, like, okay, is this because of a change? What happened in the last 6 months? And you can kind of investigate, did we create, or is there a pain point for our members that we didn't realize and we can make better? Was there a policy change and people left? I mean, there's a lot of different things you can discover just by watching those metrics. And, I've worked in community for so long. There's just things that happen in general, the summers, and I'm talking about in the Northern Hemisphere anyways, right? Summers can be slower in almost any kind of community because that's traditionally in our culture anyways, when people travel, summer break, you take your kids somewhere because that's when they have off, etc. But then of course, many communities slow down around the holidays. So we're, November, December, early January, because everyone's busy. We're all trying to just survive the holidays, or, traveling or whatnot. People often take like a good chunk of PTO then, and they might not be online in the way they they are day to day traditionally. But that's the opposite case in any sort of like mental health or emotional support community. They have a very busy time then, because that is when a lot of people, especially that don't have what we would consider like the traditional family model, feel lonely and have a hard time, because it is such a holidays are very family focused. And for whatever reason, if they don't fit in that model, or if they don't speak with their family, all of that, they'll be very busy. So you kind of just learn through years of metrics to know like when the dips and valleys are, depending on who your community serves, which is pretty fascinating, honestly. It's kind of interesting to see the different niches. And I'm sure it is similar in the more customer experience role. Like if you work for a retailer, you're going to be very busy during the holidays, right? And then maybe like all the big holidays like Labor Day, anything that's considered, oh, there's going to be a sale, right? And then the returns after and things like that, you're going to be getting a lot of calls and emails about that. So you kind of just have this ebb and flow that becomes predictable. And so then you're not panicking when you're like, oh my gosh, it's June and we still have the same amount of community members, but nobody's posting. Well, that's because they're all, it's summer, it's nice outside, they're doing stuff. And you don't have to panic. You just know.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, even from somebody from your perspective, giving other people that peace of mind, saying, if somebody's communicating back to you and saying, oh, I'm freaking out because there's not enough engagement. And you're like, listen, based off of your industry, based off of what you're trying to accomplish in your specific community, here's what I see, and here's some of the trends that I see, and here's why this is happening. So it's okay. Mm-hmm. Let's just double down on this part instead, and then we'll go back to working on the engagement in the future. One thing that you had mentioned was when it comes to engagement, it could be people kind of bickering back and forth or sending nasty grams back and forth to each other. So, that was kind of one thing I was curious about, is how do you go about setting boundaries within that community and dealing with that conflict resolution?
Oh, yes. And this is something that, especially a lot of people who are creating communities on their own, whether they're independent creators or just want to, they see this opportunity with an interest that they have, et cetera. This is like the dark side that they weren't expecting, and can be hard. And I think if you don't have a big customer experience background like we do, you may not be comfortable with it. I mean, I've had so many people yell at me over the years in different capacities where they see me as the brand of whatever, and so they take it out on me. I feel that to everyone listening who deals with that. It's rough.
Which is everyone in customer service.
Which is literally everyone. and every human should have to do customer service for like an extended period of time, just to understand. So then the next time they call or show up, maybe have a little empathy. Am I right?
Yeah. You just related to every single person in customer service. You're like, she gets me right there.
Yep. Yeah. I started working in my very early teens in retail and have done it all. So I feel you. Okay. So there's a few things, mm-hmm. and depending on if you're creating the community and running it, or you are hired on into a community, it kind of can vary, much like customer experience. Like the company you work for may dictate how you respond to people. Yeah. And so sometimes that might not be the best. And there's a better way, but you're kind of stuck. So community guidelines are something I love to talk about. I like helping people create them. That is the foundation of a community. And it's rules, but it's not rules. It's here's how you participate in this space. And here's what's cool. And here's what's not. And if you do the things that are not cool, here's what's going to happen. Those are the moderation policies, right? So you set it up, and then you have to make sure people see it. So what we do, and most communities I've worked in, we set it up this way, is when you first join a community, you get put into some sort of onboarding. And that onboarding is usually, a series of emails that are educational that 99% of people don't read. but has the info. At SPI, because it's small and because I have a lot of agency in what we do, I made that part of a whole thing. Like when you come in, you go and you read the community guidelines, you make a comment saying, I agree, to confirm that you read them. And I know at that point, and then it's gamified, you get a badge, all this stuff.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, I know you read the guidelines. Cool. That helps a lot. Like, because if no one knows that there are community guidelines, no one knows to follow them. But, examples of our community guidelines are like, be kind. They're really radical things, like respect other people and different opinions are okay. And we're a professional community. People pay to be in it. It's a place where people network and collaborate and do things. So it is like, it's the Rolls Royce of community management experiences. Like we don't have a lot of fights, if any. It's very easy to run because the reason everyone's there, the focus is on growing their businesses. So we avoid a lot of the drama. I have worked for big fighty communities where we had similar community guidelines and people did not care and, would get banned and then come back under an alt account and that whole thing. So I've definitely dealt with the other side of that. I just don't want anyone to think when I'm talking about that stuff, I'm talking about SPI because I'm not.
Thanks for the clarification.
Pro is not fighty at all. It's a very safe community, which is great. And I love it. I feel like I'm in retirement in a way. It's like, it's easy. But yeah, so you have to have very clear guidelines and you have to make sure people see them. And depending on the platform you're using and the kind of product support you have, like making people see that and agree to it before they can get in is pretty key. And there are ways to get around, not custom building a locked page that people have to do something to get through.
Yeah.
But it's important to just educate. And when people break the guidelines, then you have to be comfortable reaching out. And I always do it from a place of like, hey, you probably didn't realize this, but our guidelines say this, linking to them. And what you said violates this one. No worries. You didn't know, but moving forward, like just keep these in mind. So I always come from a place of like, oops, we all mess up.
Yeah.
Very, very friendly, very non-aggressive. People still get mad. It's okay. And then the second time is when you start to, okay, recall this conversation we had 3 days ago. I want to make sure you understand these guidelines because you've done, you did this thing again. Do you want to talk about it? So I always try to keep it very conversational. And then you get to like a final warning, just so you know, if this continues, I don't think this community is right for you and we will have to remove you. So let me know if you have questions. But it's always this like back and forth. And I think that's important to keep an open door. But you have to have de-escalation skills. And that's like kind of the private message route, but that teaches people pretty quick. The other, and the other thing you can do is if people are fighting in public comments, right?
Yeah.
You can kind of do a similar like, hey, y'all, just a reminder about the guidelines link. If you have questions, let me know. But this conversation seems to be heading to whatever. And then it's very public and people know like, oh, she's not playing. Okay. But always very friendly. I always try to do things in a friendly way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But when you do that and the community sees it, they know pretty quickly, like that's, these are the rules of engagement here.
Well, it's kind of the same as having kids, right? If you were to tell one kid one thing and another kid something else, but if you have these guidelines and things that you are non-negotiables, and maybe there's some close-handed issues versus open-handed issues,
yeah.
But if you discipline in a loving way to one of the kids and the other one's in the room, they know, okay, well, I shouldn't, and I'm not going to get away with that.
Yeah. And it's super important. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense to do things publicly, but not like call out like, Nick.
Yeah.
You dum-dum.
I know. You keep calling me out in front of everybody, and it's really awkward.
I know. You're such a problem child, Nick.
You're like, hey, but the step one, you sent me a note 10 minutes ago, and then it was 5 minutes ago, and that was 2 minutes ago, and it was 3 warnings within 10 minutes. I finally got it. Right.
Yeah. And it can be hard, and I think community managers burn out very easily. And if you have good guidelines in place and it's kind of a messy community, it's just going to happen. And the fights are always going to happen Friday at 5:30. Like it always starts going up a notch right when you're ready to check out and have your time back. And it just is what it is. I've many a times had to, jump in on a day off or even on vacation and like deal with things. That's not ideal. Of course, hopefully you have more than one person so you can cover for each other and whatnot, but it does happen. But I think if you're consistently day to day, have very consistent, modeling behavior of what is expected, and you're really quick to diffuse situations and to publicly, where warranted, do so. And it's always consistent. People really learn what the boundaries are with their behavior. And same with like reaching out to you. I mean, it'll very easily, depending on what type of community, it can turn into a whole like tattletale situation. It is very much like toddlers. Now that you mentioned, I feel like a daycare provider would be able to just run the messiest community and give zero bothers.
That's awesome.
Because like people, they're constantly pushing your boundaries. But if you have a firm boundary, and if you're like, look, I'm not responding after this time of day, and like on the weekends, it's not life or death, whatever it is, we can discuss it next week kind of thing. And if people if they realize you're not going to give them that like attention that they're seeking, that isn't great for you and your boundaries, and is just kind of a time suck, they'll stop, eventually. Maybe not immediately.
And if they don't, then they're not the right fit for the community.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing. I think a lot of people running communities, even paid communities, where you feel like, well, I kind of just have to deal with them. You do not. Yeah. Absolutely not. It's your community. I mean, obviously, if you just don't like someone because they bother you, but they're not otherwise doing anything to like violate guidelines or being unsafe or being just toxic, that's one thing. But if someone is causing harm or like ruining the vibe of your community and they're not listening and they're just argumentative, it's okay to just pull them aside and be like, look, I don't think this is the right community for you because of these reasons. And they might be like, oh, I didn't know, I'm sorry. And they get better. But more than likely, you give them a couple chances. Then you just have to say like, hey, sorry, but this isn't a right fit. I'm giving you a full refund, whatever it is, do it graciously. If it's free, then obviously no refund, but it's okay. You have to protect your community. And there's always going to be those people that think they should be a part of things, but they just don't get it. Yeah. And it's a fine line. There's not like one, this is how you deal with it. It depends on the person. It depends on the situation, but trust your gut. And if a bunch of people are leaving or not posting anymore because that one person just always has to have their say and pick a fight and has to be right or whatever, and they're not listening to your feedback about that, it's okay to say, look, we're voting you off the island.
You are
in the
link.
kindest way possible. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And it's like, people get mad at you.
Yeah.
You are the face. And if you're the one with, upholding guidelines, they're going to call you the mod cop. They're going to, they're going to lash out at you just like a kid will lash out at their parents when they get in trouble. And you just have to kind of have a tough skin and not take it personal. And sometimes that can be really hard.
Yeah, I see how that could be difficult. So with that in mind, of the listeners who are saying, man, this is really interesting, I never really thought about building a community of my own, when or why would I start a community?
There's so many reasons. So there's different types of community, right? So I think it would, what type of community do you want? Is it a place just for fun? It's cute dog pictures. It's just a place for people to go and escape their life and kind of enjoy each other's company over a similar hobby or interest. Like there's that kind. And that's how I think of a lot of like Facebook groups or whatnot. Like maybe it's a recipe share, or it's we all have dachshunds. One of my girlfriends is very deep into doxy communities because she has a dachshund. And so there's doxy meetups and like, look at my dog in a raincoat and whatnot. And that's all it is. People just show up and show off their little wiener dogs and, maybe meet in person to have little like doxy days. And that's the extent of it. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily for, it's not a paid membership or anything like that. I suppose it could be, there's a whole thing. So there's that type of community. Then there are communities that are more support communities. So that could be whether it's tech support, and you see that a lot with platforms. Platforms will have communities, right? And then within that community is where you get help for, problems you have. And it's kind of the community is helping the community with things. For example, I own a Glowforge, which is a overpriced laser cutter. And there's this huge community for Glowforge, and they have a couple people that are employed that work there that, can respond. But for the most part, it's customers helping customers. So I couldn't figure out how to resize this image to cut it at the right, dimensions. I can post in there, and someone who's really good at that will respond. So it's peer-to-peer support in a technical capacity. Apple is a great example of that. Apple support, and Apple is a great example of where there's employees there for sure, but they really, the more you participate as a participant answering, the more kind of rewards you get. So that's an example of a community designed for peer-to-peer support. But then there's also, say you are the caregiver of an elderly family member. It's exhausting. It's lonely. A lot of people don't understand. There are some amazingly supportive, tight-knit groups out there of caregivers. So maybe you want to start a caregiver group that's designed for people who caregive for someone with Alzheimer's or something like that, So I think it just depends what's the interest. What do you want to gather people together around a topic? And what does that look like? Is it a learning community? Are you teaching people things? Like I could have a community of community builders where I just help community builders and then they help each other, right? Like that would be a very easy thing for me to do because that's what I do. If a lot of your listeners are working in customer experience and want to leverage that expertise into community, I mean, there's a lot you could do there. Like who do you serve? Especially, if it's more technical, there's that piece, but even maybe you want to help people get into the industry or like how to become a supervisor, anything like that. You could have more of an educational community where there's even a course within the community, the sky's the limit, Nick.
I love this. Yeah. I'm just listening. It just
depends what you want to spend your time on, right? Because community is not passive. It's a common misnomer that you launch it, you get people in, and then you wipe your hands and you're like, sweet, I'm going to go over here.
It's the easy bake oven, Jillian. I thought that's how it always works. So you just set it and forget it.
Yeah, and it turns out exactly like the cover of the Easy Bake.
Says nobody ever.
Yeah, right.
That's so awesome.
Expected versus reality of that. And it's true. I mean, and community doesn't have to be full-time for you. Yeah. A healthy community doesn't need you there all the time.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to set the foundation, show how to participate. And depending, if you're teaching something, obviously you need to be there, but it can also be done with like, okay, if you're a part of this community, every Tuesday from noon to 1, I have office hours. It's just a Zoom call. Anybody who shows up, ask questions. You can do community in a way that works with your own schedule and within your own boundaries, for sure.
Yeah, this is awesome. I've learned a whole lot. I've learned already prior to the podcast a lot about community, and now I'm geeking out even more. And I think that this will be very valuable for all my listeners. So I appreciate that. Jillian, 2 questions I ask every single guest at the very end is, what's a book or person who's influenced you the most in the last year? And then the second one is, if you could leave a note to all customer service professionals, and it's going to hit everybody's desk Monday at 8 a.m., what would it say?
That's the easy one. So I'll start with the hard one because I've been thinking about this and it's really hard to pick. And so I'm going to pick a book that I have not read in the last year, but has impacted my life since it came out and I think of often, and that is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. If anyone's read that, actually, I don't have my copy nearby, but if I did, I could show you. And at the time, my daughter was very young, so I had a crayon and I was highlighting with a crayon, which somebody made fun of me, like at a kid thing. They were like, that's such a good idea. Then they're like, are you seriously using a crayon to highlight? It's like, it's what I had. But it's like the whole book. I was like, why am I even bothering? It's like every page has something. And I think specifically in that book, she talks a lot about just following your curiosity. Mm-hmm. And that has just very much aligns with how my brain works, but also it's just served me very well. And I think it's a really valuable idea for anybody. Like, just follow the trail. You know, if something's interesting, go learn a little bit about it. It doesn't have to be, you know, you can look up gravestones on the internet and find like your great grandmother's stone or whatever. You don't have to then become a genealogist. Yeah. You can just check it out. And then from there, you might see something and be like, whoa, what is that like pattern on that stone? I didn't like, why is there a dove? And then you go and you learn, oh, you know, in Victorian times that meant this. And then you're like, oh, cool. There's like symbolism. And now you just have this perspective on like how symbols were used in the Victorian era, which sounds like it's just an interesting little neato fact you have in your back pocket. But then you're like walking down the street and you start noticing how much that's in architecture of the time, you know, whatever it is, just follow your curiosity. It's a really fun way to live because you're always kind of discovering things and, you know, going down those wormholes. And it doesn't mean you're going to launch a business or write a book. It's just a way to make your day-to-day more interesting. Super long answer.
No, I love that though.
For something I was like, I don't know how to answer this.
And you nailed it. All right. So the next one is, if you could leave a note to all customer service reps, what would it say?
Yes. And I challenge every customer service rep to write this on a note and look at it every day. And that is, you matter.
You matter, period, or exclamation?
You matter. Just boom.
Just boom.
No punctuation. You matter.
No punctuation. I love that.
Yeah, no, because a lot of people treat people in customer experience, customer service just very poorly. Yeah. And that's a reflection on that person. It is not a reflection on you. You are a human being with feelings and emotions and great, brilliant thoughts and kindness. And don't let them get you down. Don't let them grind you down, because you matter as a person always.
I love it. That's some awesome advice. Jillian, if my listeners are saying, I really want to check out this community experience, or I want to check out SPI, how do they go about seeing that?
Yeah, well, so the community experience is available where all your podcasts are available. So wherever you're listening to Mr. Press One for Nick, you can also listen to the community experience. And then SPI, our full website is smartpassiveincome.com. If you want to look more into the community that I run, you can go to smartpassiveincome.com/pro and check out just kind of info about it. As I mentioned before, there is an application. It is for like business owners who are at a certain level. So don't feel obligated to apply if that's not you. If you are just kind of interested in how we do community in general, if you've ever purchased a course from Pat, or if you've been interested, you can do so at our website, and then you are put into our academy, which is our course community. So there's always that. But you can also just come hang out. We're Smart Passive Income on YouTube. We're everywhere.
There is so many resources with SPI just in general. If you just type in SPI, you're going to in a wormhole and find all sorts of awesome nuggets that don't even cost anything. So it's all about getting in there and getting curious, like Jillian had mentioned. But Jillian, you're awesome. Thanks so much for your time, and best of luck with the Community Experience podcast.
Oh, thank you.